Hey everybody, this is Gary from Constricted and Addicted. We've got a really special episode for you today. We're still waiting on Eric Lee to show up. Hopefully he does. But in the meantime, we've got Lucas Bagnera from Lab Exotics and the Retic Lounge, Joe Hull from Reach Out Reptiles, Chris McVicker from New Shed Serpents. I'm going to have them introduce themselves each. I'm going to start with Lucas. Go ahead and introduce yourself and kind of tell us how long you've been keeping SuperDwarf reticulated pythons and dwarf. I don't want to, I keep saying SuperDwarf, but I'm also including the dwarf as well.
Yeah. So I'm Lucas, Lab Exotics and TRL. I've been keeping Retic since early 2018. And only Eric Lee. What's up, man?
What's up?
And yeah, I think my first breeding season was in 2020, which was a failure. So this is all still very new to me. Appreciate you for having me on.
Thank you very much. Eric, just to give you a quick synopsis, we're introducing everybody real quick. So
Cool.
We're just going to do a round robin. I'm going to go to Chris next. Go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us how long you've been keeping SuperDwarf and dwarf retics.
So I'm Chris McVicker. I got my first wild caught SuperDwarf. I believe it was like 07, 08 time frame. And
Gotcha.
been keeping them ever since. Yeah, that was the old school stuff.
Thanks, Chris. Eric, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and give us the same information?
Eric Lee. Pretty much been keeping the SD stuff since about 2012 when I got back into retics, and just been going pretty much with just them exclusively the last 5 years. Got done with the mainland stuff a few years ago.
Awesome. Thank you. And Joe, go ahead.
What's up, guys? I'm Joe. Work for Reach Out Reptiles. I've been keeping SD retics for about 3 days now. I started in like 2017. I got my first one, and I was hooked. And so now I'm like, I think last count, I'm around 60 with this year's holdbacks. So I got quite a few. I got to start figuring out what I'm gonna do with them. But yeah, it's been a fun ride.
Awesome. You guys, I want to encourage people that are joining this live stream to ask questions. If you have questions, that's why these guys are here, to help us out with any sort of information that you need. I'm going to throw a question out there. I'm going to start with I'll start with Joe on this one. Who are your mentors? Who are your mentors when you got into the SuperDwarf and dwarf localities?
So it started off with Garrett. My first snake was a ball python, and then I was like, just wasn't real happy with them. You know, they're pretty, but everybody knows they're a pet rock for the most part. And so then I went and I tried blood pythons, and they were really cool, beautiful to look at. But again, you just never see them because they were always buried in the substrate, right? And then I don't know if you remember back in 2017, but there was that tiny little bitty retic that Garrett put beside a chapstick tube.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And I seen that picture and I hit him up. And at the time I was an Army recruiter living down in Cumberland, Maryland, which is about 2.5 hours from Garrett. And so I hit him up on Facebook, and I asked him, I was like, hey, instead of shipping, can I just come up? And that's where it started. And so he was heavy, you know, in the beginning. And still is, obviously, you know, working with him and everything. And then, you know, started getting introduced to literally just everybody, even here on the podcast, you know, Eric Lee, and was awesome. Always talking to him, Richard Bilbo. So those guys all were awesome, especially like Eric. I ended up in Arizona one time. I got my son. He takes us out herping. We're finding rattlesnakes and tortoises and stuff, and just climbing on these giant boulders.
Yep.
So those were, you know, but I mean, I've sat here and I've discussed with Lucas, I've discussed with Chris, then, you know, some of the old heads too, like Brad McCarthy, that, you know, he doesn't have this online presence, but I mean, this dude is a wealth of knowledge. And so, you know, that's where I got kind of my start. And then I'm just always looking to talk with new people here, you know, whether it's old school and they've been doing it and it's worked, or if it's somebody who's got a new idea. So I'm always looking for somebody new, because the minute you think you know everything that's going on with these animals, they're going to surprise you.
That's a fact. That's a fact. How about you, Eric?
When I got, like, I've had mainlands. Like, I started with my mainland collection back in 90 or 91. And back then it was all imports, nothing captive bred. So, and it was pretty much there's a local mom and pop pet shop back in the day that I just go and they get random, like cool, weird stuff that, there's no internet. So you just either the zoos or, you go to the show. And back then the reptile shows were kind of more just a freak show of just, besides the reptiles, it's just the people, because it was like so non-mainstream that you get all kinds of crazy stuff. But when I got into ST stuff back in 2012, it was getting back into retics after taking 12 years off from the military and this and that. And just kind of, King Snake was always kind of my basis when I got back into it, because I was like, I don't know where to go. Go to kingsnake.com, see how that was going. Then from there, people would be like, oh, I got a Facebook page. And I got my first pair from Retic Ranch, Greg Bryant, when I got back into it. That was supposed to be a super dwarf, Anri Sunfires. They didn't turn out to be that. But they actually stayed pretty small. The female maxed out about like 11, 12 feet. Wasn't the tamest. But from there, I just, started like branching out, researching, and just talking. I met Garrett. I think I met Garrett before when he was still at Prehistoric, just when I used to get my feeders back in the day. But then with him, like with his huge online presence, I talked to him, then got connected with him. And like, I think I met Joe through Garrett, I believe. And then everyone else, and just, staying active on the groups and just talking to various people and whatnot. And from there, it just kind of snowballed. And I think right now I'm at like 130 some retics right now, but most of those are just hatchlings from this past season, like 3.5 clutches. So, but other than that, just, yeah, that's basically it. I mean, I didn't really have a mentor per se. I just kind of, unfortunately, those early days, it's trial and error. Someone would be like, hey, this is a super dwarf. I don't have percentages, because 2012, 2013, it wasn't necessarily like, hey, this is this locale. It's just, this is a really small retic. I bred it to this kind of small retic, and they should stay small. And most of the time it didn't work out that way, but you're like, oh, okay, well, that didn't work. Then you just kind of go on to the next breeder or talk to them and get reviews from other people that were still big back then. Like Jason Reed, got some animals from him. That was kind of an iffy situation. It's kind of hit or miss with the animals, and it just kind of, live and learn.
I love hearing this old school stuff, man. This is great. Lucas, why don't you tell us who are the people that you were looking for as mentorship, or who guided you when you first got into it?
Yeah, so some notable names and then some very not notable names. But I started getting into retics and researching them like in 2015, 16, liked them since back in 2011. But unfortunately for me, the first person that kind of influenced me and that taught me a lot was Samson Pruitt. And so got my first retic off of him, but obviously started hearing the commotion about him and distanced myself from him. But there's been, like, I could give you a list of people that have influenced me in a positive way. What I like to do is talk to a lot of really well-versed people in keeping and breeding, and kind of take a little bit of everything from all of them. So just to name a few people that I'm like really thankful for. So Garrett was probably like that next up on the list back in like 2019, 2018. Rodney has taught me a lot. Aubrey Pruitt has taught me a lot. Eric Lee actually guided me through my first clutch. He had to help me with figuring out an idea of tying floss around a umbilical cord that was bleeding. Walk me through on video. And this was maybe like, I don't know, we had only spoke a handful of times on the internet. So Chris McVicker, I talk to on a weekly basis and probably ask him more questions than he cares to answer. Man, I could probably go on, but those are a lot of the big notable people that I definitely has helped really shape the way I see, view, breed, keep, handle all my retics.
Awesome, Lucas. Thank you very much. Everybody who's joining, I just want to say thank you again for joining the live stream. If you guys have questions, please put them up there. We'll go ahead and get them in so everybody can answer them. And Chris, you're one of my mentors. I mean, you're probably one of my go-to people whenever I have, I've never really had problems, but you've just become a really good friend to me since the first purchase that I've gotten from you. And it's turned into, you're my go-to guy. So who've been the people that you've looked up to and supported you through this, through owning SuperDwarfs and getting into it?
Yeah, so Jeff Byers is definitely the person that I went to the most when I first got into retics in general. the social media stuff wasn't around, so it was, herp meetings, going to shows, and he's in my backyard. He worked for Bob Clark and Mike Wilbanks, and he just had a vast array of knowledge and really helped me out through all that kind of stuff. Jason Reed, James Mitchell, we did a lot of stuff together, SuperDwarf wise, and Jake, Shane, Gavin, all those guys on the nation, we became really close and they helped me through a lot. So, I mean, those are really the first people that really kind of got me going in Retix and helped me through a lot of stuff. Because when I got into it, I did it wrong. I jumped in head first and got way too many snakes. So it was a lot of trial and error. And without them, I probably still wouldn't be in this.
Very good. Thank you. So Eric, I'm watching your posts lately, and I see you posting the ocelot or the Indo, and I saw the last post I think you made was that you're going to go SD. You're trying to influence SD into that Indo. So that's going to be my next question for you guys. Is you guys have some specific goals for the SuperDwarf for the dwarf? And I'm going to start with you, Eric, because I'm really interested in what you got going on.
Yeah, pretty much my main focus with the rainbow is just plug it into the SD stuff. Like I had used him last season to try to breed with my one of my purple GC snows. She ended up parthoing out, and come to find out she has a medical condition, osteomyelitis, so she's done breeding. So I was like, oh, because he's Posset Endocarmo. So my main thing is, besides getting him into the SD, is figuring out whether he's head or not, because that'll direct how I do other breedings in the future. But just to potentially, like, worst case scenario, he doesn't prove out, I start that triple head project right now as soon as I can with, purple rainbow snows for the future, and just raise those up. But other than that, my main thing is just more of the selective breeding. Size is always, an issue with SD stuff. People want them smaller, but at the same time, there's a ton of stuff you can do in terms of aesthetics and how they look, and making sure you do the right pairings, whether like the patterns, the contrast, or the patterns, or the thickness, or, there's all different routes you can take. And I think a big issue, a lot of people, they're just breeding to breed. There's very few people, mainland or SD, that are selectively breeding anything. I mean, it's one thing to say, hey, I have the smallest snake, but if it doesn't look the best, then you're not really doing yourself any favors long term. I mean, yeah, people buy them for the size, but then they're going to be like, as soon as someone has a small one, but a better looking one, then you're kind of like, shooting yourself in the foot. So my main thing is just aesthetics and size for the most part for almost any of the SD projects I do.
Awesome. We're going to have a question here, but I'm going to go through this question with the rest of you. Hey, Joe, what do you have any goals with breeding super dwarves or dwarves right now?
Yeah, some of my main goals that are going to be coming up hopefully this season. I'm shooting for super motley Indo caramel snows. So I've got the male motley. There'll be 50% jamp. I've got the male motley, and I've got the female motley. I think the only other person that I know of that's got a male motley is who is it? Metcalf, because there was only 2 male motleys in that clutch that happened all those years ago. And so I'm shooting for super motley Indo caramel snows. Kind of one of the long terms that I bred for this year. I did 75% Solaire tigers that are 100% het albino off a lavender female.
So happy you did that.
Yes.
Those things, it was a super small clutch. She only gave us 5. 2 went bad, so we got 1.2. I kept 1.1. Garrett kept the other female. And then I picked up a motley 50% Solaire, 100% het Indo female. So I'm going to make 62.5% orange glow motley tigers in the future. That'll be all Solaire. It's not a mix. I really want to see like what Solaire does with tiger, even at just as little as 12.5%. The Solaire influence is just astronomical, and I really want to see what that will do. I don't know if you guys seen, his name's Williams Thomas on Facebook, and he posted that insane Sunfire marble that was just jagged all the way down, all the rosettes connected, had like 100 rosettes down the side. I picked him up, so I'm putting him not this season, he won't be old enough. I'm hoping that by his second birthday, he's big enough. But I have a pure female Coyote that is super red and has the same, just hundreds of rosettes that are really tiny. So I'm going for that specific look off of that 50% Philippine male to put it into the SuperDwarf side. Other than that, like there's definitely some anery projects that I'm looking to do in the future. We did one, we got one this year off that. I don't know if some of you guys know the male Joker. He's an anery golden child, Sunfire Platinum Tiger. And so, but when I seen what he did with some high percentage anery females, we got a anery Platinum Sun Tiger, and it's literally crazy. The backstrap is almost blue. And so I really want to see where I can take that in the future too with some very specific females. So it's definitely what I want to do is I want to take certain morphs that I think will accentuate better in certain localities. Like I think Sunfire does the most amazing things in Coyote, as well as albinism, does the most amazing thing, at least Clark strain, right? But I think it looks better than any of the others. But like I have pure Madus. They're going to be coming up of age in the next couple of years, and I want to really see what Platinum is going to do with that Madu gene because it's super clean. It's already got a lot of yellows in it, so I think it's going to be a very, very bright snake. The Karampa, I'm looking for the busiest patterns possible to go there.
Marble.
Marble's been done, so I'm looking for something else that I really want to do. I'm undecided a little bit there, but some of those, and then obviously bringing down size is another one of those things like as it goes along, but that's a long game. Eric knows all about that. So, and so does Chris. I mean, he's been doing this for years too. So you can get all those, like the Slayers are going to be awesome, but they're going to be bigger and I know it. So now it's like, all right, when I finally want to try and take that cross, it's like, how small do you want to try and make it,
Thank you. How about you, Lucas? I've got a pure Coyote from you, and it's one of my favorite animals.
Yeah, I miss her. She was easily one of the most vibrant. I ended up not holding back any of the vibrant ones because the whole anery thing going on in that clutch, and I'm kind of bummed out about that. I wish I would have, but I'm doing something similar to Eric Lee in terms of the Ocelot project. So I have a male Ocelot. Eric Lee, I hope you don't have the heartbreak I did. Mine did not prove het endocarmel. I took it to a tiger het endocarmel this year and ended up with 17 tigers and only 7 normals, but no endos.
At least you have babies, though.
Yeah, exactly. At least, yeah, that's true. But so my goal with the Ocelot, number one, is I'm a locality guy. So I will be taking it to my SuperDwarf and Dwarf localities and the other localities that I have. I want to selectively breed using localities to make the absolute best looking visual Ocelots that you can find. And then from there, start shrinking down, getting more Kalatoa influence, getting more of the smaller locality influence, and hopefully make very visually aesthetic Ocelots in a smaller package. With that, I do have anery in my collection, so I'm flirting with the idea of anery Coyotes. But outside, anery Ocelots. But my Ocelot this year is going to my Ternate and my Coyote. So actually, the Ocelot's in with the Coyote right now. I also have a Retic Ghost Het Anthrax. Who I am taking to a tiny 6.5 foot 2-time prove it breeder that actually was at Reach Out Reptiles. That's a breeding loan that I'm doing with Chris Gear. So I want to take a step in the SuperDwarf game with Retic Ghost. I want to make sure that we selectively breed and try to keep that bone white. And so very silver or anery is going to be a big part. So whoever makes them first will get to turn them white walkers, blizzards, ghost snows, snowballs, whatever the hell you want to call them. So I also want to use Motley in with the ghost stuff in the SuperDwarf stuff because Motley is just known to be, if you look at any Motley albino heads, they're so white and they're bright and it just strips away the color of that actual albino gene. I forgot who it is, but they just made into caramel motleys and purple motleys, and the heads are white. So could you imagine what that would look like with snow, right? So that's a step in the right direction, because snow is ghost. Ghost is very easy to mess up. You add tiger into ghost, there goes all the yellow is going to be enhanced, all that kind of stuff. So ghost is and I think that's one of the reasons why not a lot of people have jumped in the project, is because it's difficult to really make look really, really good. And then I also have a 50% Kalatoa Sean McMillan line. He produced it, female anthrax. So I'll be working with anthrax with the ghost stuff, but and then one project that I've been working on now for the last 3.5 years, and the motley is finally going to be of age. I'm going to be calling them snow mels. So snow amels. I'm looking for a really creamy, buttery yellow that's very light with a bunch of high white. So really excited for that project. And outside of that, I think locality is my bread and butter. So, if anyone asks me, like, what do you plan to do? What are you doing? Number one answer is always locality. Next answer is going to be those special projects, at least special to me, that I mentioned.
Thanks, Lucas. A lot of people have joined. I just want to say welcome to everybody. And like I said, if you guys have questions, we're going to start answering questions from you guys if you have any. And I don't care about subs to the channel, but if you like this video, that's what gets it out. That's what gets other people to see the content in this video. So help the algorithm out. I don't know much about algorithms. I'm just kind of being a parrot with that whole thing out here. Algorithms are what kind of drive who sees what videos. So before I go there, Chris, I'm pretty sure you're like Anthrax and Phantom is like your morphs, man. But go ahead and tell us, what are your goals with locality?
So I actually got out of the anthrax stuff. I only had that in mainland, but I've been working on SuperDwarf titaniums for the past 9 years.
Dude, he's the man.
And this was the year for that for me. I made 75% SuperDwarf citrons. I made 50% SuperDwarf platinum citrons, and 2 really good looking 50% SuperDwarf titanium. So I'm gonna continue that project. I'm not going to do what I did with mainlands and just put a bunch of morphs into it. I want to kind of use the titanium for the citron and just enhance the platinums and the phantoms and marble and sunfire, anery, stuff like that. I think it'll be kind of like using, pastel and ball pythons. So I'm really working that project pretty hard. And then a lot of you guys have seen that anery marble sun that I have, that green goblin looking thing. That's what I really, really want to figure out, is how to make that green pop up again. So I'm putting a lot of Slayer back into that, some SuperDwarf, more Phantom and Marble. So if that really pops off and I can figure out how to make that green pop again, that'll be my ticket. I love that green. That's probably my favorite animal I have.
We got to bring the hashtag back, bring titanium back. Like that needs to be a thing. No one's working with it, and Chris just did something massive this year with getting them into SuperDwarf. So Chris, I'm happy that you're keeping
a lot of people don't like titanium, and I really think that is because in mainland, I did it myself. We put a bunch of genes into it and it turned it into a patternless snake. But if you focus and single genes, the purples, outward, any albino, but platinum, sunfire, stuff like that, you can still get that side pattern, that striping with the black and the white, and it gives it that contrast. It really makes it pop. So
I think with titanium, you need the platinum and the anery, put those 2 on it, and just let it be that 3 gene animal, and that's the perfection with it.
And
I agree.
I want to say one more, by the way, this round robin and me being silent, you guys are putting my ADHD to the test. I have my impulsivity. I have wanted to say 1,000 things, and it's driving me crazy. But I just wanted to comment because everyone is, in the comments here learning, and this is kind of something that we're doing. But what Chris mentioned about bringing citron back and using citron so citron's a het titanium, and they are very vibrant animals. They look a lot different than some of the normals. And so even just a het titanium can look totally different. It was kind of what was done back in the day with granite back. had anthrax, and no one's doing that anymore. But yeah, so I think that's freaking awesome.
Yeah, I've actually made albino citrons that look sunfire, and I've mixed them up before, so it can really make it pop.
You're talking about, green. I've got a couple of retics from Chris that are green in color, and that Phantom Platinum mix really makes that dark green and then that light, almost yellow green kind of pops. I mean, like, I love her, especially after a shed. She looks absolutely amazing. So let's tackle this question here that's on the board here. And I think this could be a lot different for you guys as opposed to, well, maybe not, because when you're selling mainland animals, I'm sure you want to make sure you're selling it to the right person. But when you're selling a locality animal, some people may have some information or misinformation about what they're going to expect to get from you in 5 years' time, what that animal is going to look like. So do you guys have some sort of process that you go through when somebody comes to you and says, hey, I'm interested in buying a SuperDwarf from you or a locality animal? All right, let's start with Eric.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just asking the potential buyer, like, what are their expectations? Because they'll come to you with all kinds of questions, like, and it's one of those things I always tell them, like, you can have something that is small or the color or pattern or a combination, but everything is kind of dependent on your budget. Like, if you want all three things, you can pay a fortune, because that's just how it is. Where I don't think a lot of buyers understand, like, they'll come to me like, hey, I want like a 75% like purple, SD. I don't care about the other Morris. I just want that, or I want higher percent. And normally I'm like a 75%, color, any of the SD, locality albinos are pricey, for the simple fact that the time it takes just to make that animal, on top of most people that throw other genes on, I don't think a lot of people understand, because I usually explain it like, okay, that's like just to make that 75% purple. Like, what is that? Like a 10 or 11 year project if you hit the right ratios and the sexes and you outcross it instead of line breed it over and over. Is this one of those things? Like, I've had people come, like, I posted those purple Marblehead Amory stuff recently, and people, like, they asked me about it, like, oh wow, that's super expensive. I'm like, yeah, I'm 10 years into it and I still haven't hit the marble snows, which is fine. But like I said, 10 years in, 4 or 5 different breedings into it now, is one of those things where, like, I'm not going to shoot myself in the foot and just try to be like, oh, let me lower the price for you. I mean, it's one of those niche things where I think anyone on the panel is like, Chris probably knows, like, you have 8, 9, 10 years in a project. If you find the right buyer, great. But if you don't, like, I'm not shooting myself in the foot just to make a sale. And I think a lot of people, once you explain it to them, instead of just giving them some like jerk off answer where you kind of blow them off, because I know a lot of people will be like, oh, I talked to so-and-so, they didn't really answer my questions when they found out I wasn't buying. Because I probably legitimately talk to people every day, and 9 times out of 10, they don't buy anything from me, which is totally cool. I'd rather have them have the right information than if they buy something from someone, at least they know what to ask. Because my biggest thing is people, that size thing, I think, kills everyone, where a lot of new people have this unrealistic, I want a 5-foot retic. Yeah, it's a yearling. It'll be 5 feet, no problem. You're not getting an adult that's 5 foot. And I always try to explain to people, like, there's a really big difference between an adult animal and a breeder animal. And most, like, the newer people, like, what do you mean? Well, a breeder can be 4 years old on a female. It could be a year and a half or 2 years old on a male, which obviously, 8, 9 more years of breeding, of growing. I mean, so it's one of those things where you just got to educate buyers. Some of them are super educated, which is great, because I think personally right now, all the more educated buyers are getting way more discerning in what they buy, which forces breeders to be way more selective. You can't just crank out a bunch of babies and be like, oh, I'm going to sell them, because people don't know. People are learning, which is good. And it forces us as breeders to be like, okay, I'm going to make a more, selective breeding, more refined, where I'm not mass producing. It's just maybe a couple clutches, but everything's purpose driven for whatever you're shooting for, in terms of compared to a few years ago where people were cranking out as much so-called SD stuff just because the buyers were new, they're uneducated, and they're kind of gullible. And I mean, I think we're stepping away from that, which is great for the industry.
That's awesome. That's awesome, Eric. Thank you. Let's take care of your ADHD there, Lucas. Go ahead and answer this question.
Can you see it in my face now? So, I mean, I absolutely, education's right. If I don't know the individual, I'm always asking for a phone call. If I've never spoken to them, they reached out, they said they saw my stuff or they heard about me from someone, I like to ask them like, hey, I'll answer any questions. Let me know if you also have time for a phone call. And I agree with Eric, preaching the education and the expectations. But I also, so like if I don't know them, they reach out to me on social media, I'm going to go to their profile. If it's not fully private, I'm going to see if they own a Retic. If I can see that they own a Retic, that's at least a relief for me, right? But I always like to ask the question, have you kept Retics before? How long have you had snakes? If they ask no about like, have you kept Retics before? Just to be clear, if someone has not kept a Retic before and they want to buy a SuperDwarf from me, that does not stop me from selling them that animal. But I also extend and let them know, I'm selling you this animal. I will walk you through every step of that process. Ask me if you have any questions. But I've actually been I've been cussed out before on Messenger because I've denied people to sell an animal because they refuse to send me a picture of a thermostat of even just like a tub if it's for a hatchling, right? Like I was like, that's cool. Let me see, the setup that you might have. And, so I will always make sure in terms of vetting that they will have a thermostat, that they have a place for the snake. And if I don't know them and I know they don't keep SuperDwarf Retics, I do ask those things. And I think it's been like on 3 or 4 occasions, they say no. I say, I'm sorry, I won't sell. I either get, okay, that's weird, or I get cussed out. But at the end of the day, you can ask anybody in the comments here. Like anybody I've sold or has one of my animals, I follow up pretty often. I love getting updates. So it means a lot to me when I send the animals out and who's going to get them. So yeah, I want to make sure that they understand husbandry and that they have the setup ready to go. Not that they're setting up the day that the snake gets there.
I think it's reciprocal too, that as a keeper, I'm not a breeder. So as a keeper, when I buy an animal from anyone, and social media can be a good or a bad thing, but in a good way, I post pictures because you guys all follow me. So you're going to see pictures of your animal on my social media, and that's going to give you that update right then and there. Hey, she looks beautiful. Or, if you have any questions, you have the right to ask that. So, Chris, what about you?
So, I mean, it's kind of like what everybody else has said so far. I check out Facebook or Instagram if they've got a link to it, and if it looks a little suspicious, if I see a lot of aquariums and stuff, I'll talk to them and try to educate them that some things don't work real great for Retics. I've actually had a situation like Lucas, except it was an adult that the guy wanted to buy, and my ad clearly said not for beginners, and he had never owned a Retic. I'm like, this snake will hurt you. Like, if you don't have experience or have somebody that can vouch for you, you're not getting this animal. And he got all pissed off and cussed me out. And I was like, that's fine. For me, I want the snake to go to a good home and not just get thrown away. And if you can't handle some of the stuff that I've had over the years, you're not going to get it from me. I mean, you got one, so and she wasn't like horrible, but she wasn't, the best. And you've done all the work and you asked all the right questions, so you got the animal. And I think a lot of people just kind of want to make sales, and we kind of need to ask the right questions, talk to people. I love Lucas's thing where the phone call. I've actually never thought about that. I do a lot of texting and messaging because I'm kind of busy, but I might start adapting that to where the one-on-one conversations would be so much better than the text.
I drive a lot.
There you go. So I really like that idea, but just ask questions, man. And on the size thing, like Eric was saying, some people don't realize the different localities, or like I've worked with a lot of unknown stuff from my original wild caught, and I always show the picture of my 50% SuperDwarf, 25% Jamp. It's like 15 foot, and then I'll show one that's like 10 or 11 foot. I'm like, these are the differences. So you really got to know the breeder and ask the right questions. But if you're not asking the right questions as a breeder, we should educate the people that are buying from us or attempting to buy from us.
I got to tell you that when that one-on-one, that really does go a long way. Just the other day, I called you and we talked about something. And then when we got done talking about that, we just started talking about normal stuff, which was, that was very cool. I mean, like I said, as somebody who has purchased from you before and developed a relationship with you, that was, I was like, that was, I mean, I don't know what else to say, you know, it touches people when people when you go out that extra mile to do things like this, it really does touch people. And I'm one of those people. So I appreciate that.
Well, I love these animals, and I like talking about them. You don't have to buy a snake for me to ask questions. If you got a question, hit me up, man. I'm there. It may take me, 30 minutes, a couple of hours, depending on what I'm doing, but I'm going to respond to it.
Yeah, and you do. Joe, how about you?
So, for me, I definitely have to do it at a more commercial level, obviously working for Reach Out, but because I get literally 50 inquiries a day between everything, whether it's Messenger, now Morph Market, email, text, right? Like I'm fielding them from a ton of ways. And so what I started figuring out was how do I streamline this to get the questions I want answered, right? So it doesn't matter, if you're a first time hitting me up, sometimes even a second or third time, but I've got like a 3 keystroke where it gives my first paragraph, if it's by text or whatever, I'm like, hey, we want to make sure we're fitting the best animal to you, because everybody asks me for an availability list, and everybody knows that Reach Out doesn't do that. And honestly, if there was one piece of advice I could give to anyone that does breed and sell these, is don't just shell out an availability list, because people are literally, what they are going to do is just go and look and be like, bam, okay, I can afford that, bam, that's pretty, all right, boom. Like, it's your job as the breeder to make that connection. So I tell them that out the gate, and then I ask them 5 questions. The first one is, what state do you live in? Because it is important that you are not shipping a snake to a state that we know it's illegal, right? I don't know everybody's city ordinances and everything, and I tell people, like, hey, it's on you to know your local laws. But I can guarantee you I'm not shipping a snake to New York. Or if you ask me, like, oh, why, I'm just across the river, can you ship it to Jersey? No. Absolutely flipping not. I don't it's illegal to keep in your state. You know what I'm saying? Because if somebody finds out, guess what? That animal's going to be destroyed. I don't ship it to Florida, obviously. I don't ship it to Alabama right now because Alabama doesn't allow them. Arkansas right now, if you guys don't know, does not allow retics to come in, right? The people that are grandfathered in, that's it. So those, and then everybody knows there are no snakes in Hawaii. So, but I look for those answers, and that's the first one. And it's like, all right, next, I want to know, to help you out, where are you thinking your budget is? Because the reality is, you're not going there and picking up, a $50 impulse snake, right? Like they cost a certain amount of money. So I want to see where you're at to know, all right, do I need to educate you on the fact of what these cost? Do you have an unrealistic expectation? Are you looking for a male or a female? Do you know? Then do you have a certain morph for a certain look you like? And then what size are you expecting as an adult? And so those 5 questions start, and based on those answers, I can start to gauge and figure out, all right, where do I need to start diving deeper? Because if someone's like, nope, I got a realistic, here's what I've got as far as I live in a good state. And if they come back and be like, I've also checked my local laws, and we've got no restrictions, or certain ordinances have been like, I can't do anything that is going to get over 12 feet. I'm like, all right. I'm looking for my absolute smallest males, that are going to be there for them, because there's always that chance that they're going to exceed, even what we estimate them at. So I'm like, do I expect this male to get anywhere past 12 feet? I don't even think you could feed it enough to get it past that far, right? And that's the things that I'm looking at all the time whenever I'm having those conversations with them, and picking it apart to see, okay, where do they need more education? Okay, where do they need to have a little more understanding? Earlier, Eric was talking about, I want a 75% purple and I want it for $500, right? It just doesn't exist. It's not there. There's hardly 75% purples out there, right? Just to have. And if you do, so it takes some education. And then when you start asking those questions, what you get to is the reality of what do they really want. And it's in how you ask those questions. And ultimately what you find out is they're like, I want something pretty and it's not going to get huge. It's going to be manageable. And you know what? I don't want my wife to kick my ass if this thing gets 20 feet. And when you can give them that and you're like, all right, hey, boom. And then here's the parents and here's, you know, like showing them this is the expected size. I think that, you know, just like everybody said, it's having that conversation. It's talking with them. And I talk with them on the phone. And everything to try and definitely, if I don't feel like I'm getting across with text, then I'm like, hey, you know what, guys, we need to set up a phone call. Let's talk. Right. And it's to where I can, you know, really get that connection that's not happening otherwise. And ultimately, you know, I think, you know, we find what they're looking for. We educate them a little bit more, a little bit better. And then, you know, and then also I try and give them places to go and, you know, resources where they can start to learn on your own. I'm like, because you can't, like, if you can't have asked it to always be spoon fed to you guys, like you have to start looking at this and figuring it out and doing a little bit of your own research so that you own that knowledge and you're not regurgitating, which we see all the time on all the forums. It's just a regurg of information with no real backing of understanding. So I try and give them, you know, somewhere a resource that they can go and start looking at that as well.
Awesome. This is, you guys, this is an amazing panel we have here. I mean, the answers and the responses that we're getting are just like amazing. I'm just sitting here like, okay, where do I come in? Because I'm just enthralled in all the answers, man. This is great. I also want to remind everybody, if you guys have questions, please, this is the time to ask them. We touched on this a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and ask this question. How do you guys respond when somebody says, I want a steak that's going to get 6 to 8 feet long, or they assume that that's what a super dwarf is going to get when they hear that term super dwarf? How do you guys respond to that, Eric?
I just say it's not realistic because like the size thing alone is like kind of ridiculous in my opinion. But what makes it worse is like when they see the morphs, then they're expecting like whatever cross, even a high percent, to be smaller than their peers. And there's certain breeders out there saying all kinds of craziness where their crosses are smaller than peers. You just got to educate them. It's like one of those things. Like I tell people, it's like you got to figure out what you want. Like Joe was saying, do you want something that's pretty, or is it size dependent, or is it budget dependent? And from there, you kind of, you know, work with that. But when someone says some crazy number, like, oh, I want it like no bigger than 5 or 7 foot, I flat out like retics aren't for you. Because even if you got any of the peers, more than likely, even a male, like at 10, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old is probably gonna get bigger than 5 to 7 feet, period. I mean, yeah, there's plenty of breeder males out there that are in that range that are young. Give them another 10 years. I can almost guarantee you all those animals will be bigger. And my thing now is like, you know, my big push for my own personal collection is like, I've been trying to work on my garage, which has been a nightmare, but getting like huge cages for them, you know, because let's face it, for the last probably however long we've been doing retics, the mantra has always been small is fine. They reproduce for us, blah, blah, blah. But now, like, I think the keepers and the non-breeders are doing way better jobs than the breeders, just because they have the luxury of space. Because when you have 2 animals, you can do amazing things with 2 animals. When you have 100 animals, you can do some things with them. But with that being said, personally, I think as the industry learns and we all start trying to go for like big, not elaborate, but just bigger cages for more exercise, I guarantee you that those so-called size requirements are going to get blown out of the water, just because these animals are now all of a sudden going to get to exercise all the time. It's not, hey, I take them out 10, 15 minutes a week. It's, hey, they're in a massive enclosure where they can stretch and move their muscles that they didn't have before, because before they're in a 14-inch tall cage. Now they're in 3, 4, 5 foot cages where they're exercising all the time. And obviously more exercise, more food, you're going to get bigger than what normally, like even now people are like, oh, I have a small one. But in my thinking is if you were to put them in a dramatically larger cage, those animals are going to get substantially bigger than what we even currently think they can, just because they now have the additional calories, they have the additional exercise, where I think 10 years from now, when people say SD, they're going to be like, oh, that's that 10 or 12 foot animal, not that 6, 7 foot animal that has never exercised, sits in one corner of the cage, gets fed and gets bred. So I think that mentality is going to be basically a thing of the past in the next few years.
Thank you. Chris, I'm going to have you answer this one next too. As I see you post pictures of older SuperDwarf animals, and it really depicts how big they can get.
Oh yeah, I mean that's and that's one of the reasons that I post pictures like with me holding the animal, because people are like, oh, 10 to 12 foot is huge, and I'm like, well, it's really not. Like, if you look about how big around it is, it's not really that big, and when it's balled up, it looks even smaller. So I think a lot of the, I want a 6 to 8 foot animal. Obviously, that's not going to happen, but the 10 to 12 foot is still manageable for most people, and even a little bit bigger is still manageable. So I just try to educate people, and we are all still learning in this. The super dwarf crosses, at least, are still fairly new. I mean, my oldest was 13, 14 years old, and I mean that's still young, and that's the first generation. So as stuff starts getting older and we get more generations going and they be mature, not just breeder like Eric said, actually mature, that 12 to 14 years, we can kind of see the actual size of these things, and we can start giving better estimates on the potential size of these babies that we're selling. So for me, it's just all on education. 6 to 8 foot's not going to happen, especially with a cross.
Yeah. How about you, Joe? I'm sure you deal with this a lot. Somebody calls up Reach Out Reptiles and says, "Hey, man, I want a 6 to 8 foot super dwarf retic."
Oh yeah, I get it all the time. And one of the things I talk to them about, and this is usually one of those where I want to have a conversation. So I'm like, "Hey, you got time for a phone call? Let's make it work." And I'm like, this is what I tell people, and I bet Lucas could probably chime in on this, is that when we think 6 to 8 foot, because our mindset automatically goes to a human, right? Like we're looking at, this is the big size, right? I'm 6 foot. And so I'm like, okay, if I'm looking at something that's that big, and their brain doesn't automatically equate it to the fact of what a snake, is at 6 to 8 feet. And they've probably honestly never seen a snake that's truly 6 to 8 feet to understand it. So I said, guys, like, let me send you some pictures. And I do, I've got different pictures that I use where we have measured those animals. I'm sure if you're on our Instagram, you've seen where we've done the Facts and Figures Friday, right? And like talk and be like, here, guys, like I'm holding it. Like, where do you think it's at? And Chris made a great point. I've got a 9 foot mainland downstairs. He's a pied, but he's literally like this big around, right? I mean, if I put a colossal rat through him, which I do like once every 2 months to give him a really big meal, try and pushing him to grow, and he's 6 years old, like he's just tiny, he's thin, right? And that's like, when Chris said is balled up, or he's sitting there, I'm holding him on one arm, and I take him to education events, and they're like, there's no way he's almost 10 feet. And I'm like, yeah, he's like 9.5 feet. And they're like, it's just not, no, that doesn't compute. So I tell them that, and I was like, the other side of it, guys, I was like, is that you're raising this snake from a baby. I was like, we can give you an estimated size where it's going to get to. I said, but if it gets a little larger, I said, the thing is like, you're worried about it because you're looking so far ahead in the future. I'm like, but you are literally going to get that snake, and you are going to do everything for that snake to give it the best life possible. So I was like, you're going to learn to read its body language. You're going to learn the intricacies of that particular snake. I said, because I said, I promise you, I said, I'm a large collector. I've got, at the time it was like more like 40, and now I've got my whole back. So there's a lot of babies, but I'm like, each one of them, I said, I know their personality. I know whether I can reach in the cage and just, pull them out with no issue. And if I got tagged, because it would literally be a surprise, right? I got other ones, like I've got one, she's 50% Kalatoa, she's 50% Madu, 50% Kalatoa, right? And I can't touch her, without like literally going through an entire process. And I know that she's going to lunge at me at least 3 or 4 times during that process, So like, I'm like, you guys are going to learn that about each individual snake, whether you have one or you have multiple. And I'm like, when they hit that size, which seems intimidating now, I'm like, you're honestly going to be like, this is my puppy dog. It's like me. I've got a 100-pound Rottweiler, and when I walk him down the street, people literally go to the other side of the street because they're worried about him. He's a big dog, And I'm like, he comes up, like if I let you in the house, he's literally the only thing he's going to do is knock you over from leaning on you and try, I'm like, and your snake's going to be the same way. you are going to know that snake. And so I said, it's not as intimidating as you think it is right now. And, that's my biggest piece of advice for people is, definitely understand what your limits are and try and buy within those limits, especially for caging, like what Eric was talking about. Like if you know that you can only fit 1 6-foot enclosure in your house, then yes, I'm definitely going to look for you the smallest snake possible that I think is going to hit at, the smallest, because you're going to be able to give it more room. But I'm not going to put something that I think has got the potential. I'm not going to give you a Solaire that's got the potential at 12, 14 feet if all you can afford in your house space-wise is 6 feet. It's just that's not a good scenario.
Yeah.
So those are the big keys right there, I think, is just letting people know that their thoughts and fears are and apprehensions are valid, but then knowing how to put those at ease for them is the key right there to, I think, making people understand and be more comfortable with the fact of what they could potentially get, even though it's not what they wanted right out the gate.
Yeah, I think you hit the point about knowing your animal's behaviors, because I've got 12 retics here, and there are some just like they'll size me up. As soon as I open up that enclosure, they are sizing me up, and I can rub the hook, divert their attention, get them out, absolutely no problem. And then I've got my 12-footer up here. I can open up the enclosure and pull her right out. I mean, without a hook, because I know her behaviors. But the other side of this is, as a keeper, I'm handling my animals all the time. They're desensitized to human touch. They know me. So they're used to me coming and rattling the locks or opening a door. They're very used to it. But like I said, some of them, it's a process. Some I have to open up. I have to stand back. I have to watch what they're doing. I have to rub them with the hook. And then I know when it's that time to go ahead and pull them out. Lucas, how about you?
Yeah. So, I mean, just to kind of talk about an agreement with some of the things, I'll do that quick and then add a little bit more info because I think everybody covered it really well. 6 to 8 foot lets me know off the top of my head that the number one concern that they have is their animal getting big, right? And so I tend to give them that realistic expectation, right? You can maybe expect a Kalatoa male that's 12 to 15 years old to be, 7, 8 feet. But when we're talking about crosses that are in the mix and bringing in mainland blood, the genetic diversity and just where it hits on that expression, you really just don't know. And so estimations are something that I really don't like giving. But anybody who's gotten an estimation from me, ask them, it's probably like 4 to 5 feet. Because I'm just not going to put my reputation on telling you it's going to be this size. And so the next thing, Joe actually hit on 2 points that I was going to talk about. Number one, I want to know from that person, is it fear-based of why you want 6 to 8? You don't want to end up with a huge snake because you don't think that you can handle a huge snake, right? And having fear, by the way, is or worry about a large snake is totally normal. I don't say that from a judgmental standpoint. Or is it a space thing? Are you in an apartment and you only have a 6-foot wall that you could put an enclosure, right? If it's not space, I do the same thing Joe does. I have pictures that I send people of a 9-foot retic in one hand, right? That's coiled up and in between and laying on my forearm, and that it's 8.5, 9-foot retic. That's my email that I have. And so I want to get people to understand that, a 9 to 10 foot retic is extremely manageable with how lean they are. So that was talking about one of the points that Joe mentioned. The second one is, oh man, I lost my train of thought. Anyways, let me just kind of go on and answer the question. I really want to introduce them to the idea that if you are just keeping, you can absolutely handle something that it's that much bigger. But I really emphasize, if you are looking for small, and small is relative. I like to tell people that, these are SuperDwarfs of the largest species of snake in the world, or the longest, right? So how realistic can we be of expecting a 6 to 7 foot animal? And this is the big part that I wanted to mention. So these SuperDwarf islands and all the other tiny islands that we've never seen or had imported, but they're out there, and retics are definitely on there. They're smaller because of insular dwarfism, right? They're broken apart. They are taken away. The food source is much scarce. It's smaller because they don't have access to larger prey items. Now that we're bringing them into captivity, we're kind of reversing it. We're offering them food that's larger than they would possibly be able to find in the wild. And if you want to feed your SuperDwarf like a SuperDwarf on the island, small meals, scarcity, that snake is always going to be hungry, and you're always going to be on your toe when you open up that enclosure. And so as we continue to go on through time, we're going to be reversing the kind of insular dwarfism, and they're going to have the potential, like Eric said, to, we're going to be using that 10 to 12 foot mark because people are going to be more educated, and we're going to see throughout time that they stay larger. But everyone is worried that if we start to tell people that they actually can get 10 to 11 feet, right? Like I've seen an 11-foot Kalatoa. I don't know if I've seen a 12-foot, but I'm sure they probably can exist. But I've seen the 11-foot Kalatoa, and I think a lot of people are scared that if we let people know the reality of that, people are no longer going to want to buy SuperDwarfs. But at the end of the day, a 9 to 11-foot Kalatoa is a manageable snake for most people. If you can provide the proper size enclosure, I try to help with boosting their confidence, and not just to gain a sale, because most people that want retics because they love the intelligence, love the there's so much to love about retics, right? I think if everybody could, most people would probably want to get one just because of the reputation they have of their intelligence, inquisitiveness, and but yeah, I mean, I try to help build confidence if they really want to retic. Because when they ask me, do you have anything that'll stay 6 to 8 feet as a full grown adult, I tell them, no, I'm sorry, I don't, but no one else does either. Now there might be some animals out there that stay small, but I just want you guys to keep in mind that if we're messing with like F1 Kalatoas, F2 Kalatoas, even F3 we're only 3 generations removed from the wild. We don't know what the other clutch litter, like the clutch mates were of that wild caught animal. And so even if that wild caught animal is 9 feet or 8 feet and 12 years old, you don't know what the potential would have been with any of the other clutch mates. So there's still genetic diversity that is untapped with the F1s, F2s, just because it's still very closely removed from the wild.
You brought up a good point, and one of the things that I get asked a lot is about feeding when you're feeding locality animals, as opposed to I don't like big lumps in my animals. I like small lumps. But how do you guys? What is your feeding schedule? How does it differ from, say, a mainland or even any other constrictor for that matter? When you're talking about a locality animal that, like you said, Lucas, it's on an island, and it doesn't have that same access to food that us humans are giving it. What is your feeding schedule like when it comes to the SD, the 100% pures, if that's what you're working with?
So, were you asking me or?
No, go ahead. You go first.
Sorry, that was impulsivity that kicked in. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I wish I was a type A personality like a lot of people, that they're like, my steaks get fed on this Sunday at this time and at this date every single, right? Like my feeding schedule is so wild. And I really like to let the snakes tell me, but as far as size goes, I always change it up. I'm the opposite. For some reason, it's fulfilling to see my snakes swallow down a massive meal. Doesn't matter what locality. It's amazing to see what they can do. And I know they're just happy. They're stuffed. But when I do that with my snakes, I definitely space out the time in between. When they're babies, it's for the SuperDwarf stuff, I like to feed every 4 to 5 days, smaller meals, right? I like to get that digestive system established really early. And to be honest, my yearlings might be this isn't a fact or anything, but I would almost venture to say that my yearlings are probably bigger than a lot of other people's SuperDwarf yearlings, just because that first year, I really like to get food in them. I want them to have a very active digestive system. Now, I don't power feed my animals by any means, but with my SuperDwarf stuff, I'll give them a small meal, give them another small meal in a week, and then I'll look at their behavior, and when they're pacing back and forth and they look hungry, I'll give them a medium meal. Every once in a while, I'll give them a huge meal. But like with my ternate localities, I cannot get them to grow, and the only way I've gotten them to grow, for some reason, it seems like they will only gain size if you give them really big meals. So most of my ternate locality stuff eat pretty big meals, much bigger than most would give a SuperDwarf. So it really varies, and I always like to change it up.
Thanks. How about you, Eric?
I don't really have a set schedule like Lucas. Like, depending on what I have going on in my life, there's times where like the pure stuff, like on the adults, sometimes, like, I don't know, because I write everything down. Every animal has its own feed card, shed, and all that stuff, so I keep track of everything. But sometimes I'm old and senile, and I forget, and I look, and I'm like, oh my God, it's been almost a month. But the one thing I've noticed about all my pure stuff, none of them ever push. They'll like pace, like Lucas say, like looking for food, but they never, like, not all my crosses, but some of my crosses, if I don't feed them like on a certain schedule, I see them in the corners of their cages pushing. But none of my pure stuff, hatchlings or adults, where sometimes I just completely forgot to feed them, and it'll be 2, 3, or 4 weeks for the adults, but they don't push. I mean, they're definitely food driven when I open the cage, but I've never had issues with the pures, thank God. But when I do feed them, usually like the males are probably about every 2 weeks for the adults. The females are usually about 10 to 14 days. And like with Lucas, I'll change it up where for me, it's not necessarily like bigger or smaller meals. Sometimes I do that. But for me, is like I'll start extending the time in between. Because my big thing personally is like I think they should have more time on an empty stomach than either full of food or feces is my thing. So it's like there's no reason they should be stuffed 24/7 with either one, in my opinion. So, and right now out here in San Diego, as it gets warmer, I try to get them out more often so I don't want food in them. So I'll feed them, and it usually takes them right now roughly maybe 8 to 12 days to pass the meal. And after that, for a few days, I'll try to take them out as much as I can, handle them, let them go in the jungle gym. And then as long as they're not bitey, like you were saying with your animals, like when when they're stalking you, they have their head pitched at that weird angle. When you open the cage, you're like, okay, that's a food thing. Like, I'm not going to take you out, but I'll feed you. But if they're like not in that food mode, I'll just kind of let it go. Even with the crosses, where same thing. Other than hatchlings and yearlings, I'll do like once a week, which is pretty consistent. Everything else is kind of like, hey, Eric remembered to feed me today. Great. And sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Or if I'm out of town, like I know some people like to kind of feed like either right before or right after, so they don't have a mess to come home to. I'm just kind of like, I just kind of wing it. Sometimes I'll do it before, then I have an exponential amount of work to come home to because everything's disgusting. Or if I'm like, oh, I'll just wait, extra 4 or 5 days won't hurt them. So it's kind of, with the adults, I don't mind, like just because they're adults is fine. I don't see an issue with it. With the hatchlings and stuff and anything under a year old, I try to keep it probably no more than like 7 to like 10 days max.
Thank you. How about you, Joe?
So I've been experimenting since I moved into this place a year ago. Like I said, I got to keep them down in the basement, and these Pittsburgh basements stay a consistent like 63 to 64 degrees, right? Which is a lot cooler, than a lot of people would want to keep, even at a gradient temp at. And but I started noticing some major differences in their food response and stuff. Their hot spots are set at around 85 to 86, and then all of my snakes have large, if they're in tubs, my tubs are 3 feet, right? And they've got one small piece of heat tape right there so they're throughout. I see them in the front, like I said, I temp it, it's 62 degrees and they're up there. The snake is cool, but I never have a food refusal. I do it a lot like Eric. It's never on a consistent schedule. Not even with the babies I bring home. I mean, sometimes it's every week. Sometimes I forget and it's 14 days. Some babies have gone as much as 21. And I think that that's because it lets them understand like, hey, like it's not I'm getting fed like a human every, on a schedule. And, but I will say the biggest takeaway of living here that I have seen a positive response, and I really think, is that we as an industry are keeping these animals too hot all the time, trying to get them to digest and everything. They definitely need that hot spot in order to make that happen. But I think when, offering them cooler temperatures, I don't have any issues with pushing anymore, period. Like, at all. All of my pushers have completely stopped keeping at a cooler temperature. All their food is digesting very well, but a little bit slower. And this is where I still agree with Eric on his point, is like letting them go and get that extended time where they're not always either full of poop or full of food is good, because you're talking about an animal that literally eats a prey whole like that. The only thing that it has to break it down is that stomach acid. Well, that stomach acid needs a certain amount of time to reset in order to be fully effective, right? We know that even in that's human, that's just straight biology. So I think the extended period of time, sometimes, hey, it's quick, it's great. Or if I've got extra meals that need to go so I can make room in the freezer, guess what? They get an extra meal. They're extra happy with me, and there's, otherwise they're sitting there and, and the other thing I think that's important with SuperDwarf and Dwarf is varying their prey items. And I honestly think that you would see a lot less issues, and this is just, this is more probably premature for me to say, but I think based off of what they're, more of what's natural on their habitat, which is a lot of bats, a lot of things that are hollow boned. I think a lot of reasons that we see issues is we're feeding prey items that are much heavier in calcium than they would get in the wild. I think that Lucas makes a good point, as like we're getting it back to the point where they can handle that stuff. The farther we get them removed from wild caught and, reversing that insular dwarfism, I think we're also reversing that with the amount of calcium and stuff that we feed in stuff like pigs and, rats that are, versus where they get more hollow bones. So whenever I was in Cumberland, I used to feed almost exclusively fowl, birds, whether it was turkey, chicken for the bigger stuff, ducks, and because I had a great hookup for it. And once they got past the bowel movement change of like, oh, there's a different thing in my diet, that's always nasty. You're like, oh, that's worse. But after that, like they were more active. They were healthier, I think, and I think the biggest key is like that you really have to look at with feeding is not overfeeding. Like we equate food with comfort. This is why like the obesity problem is such a massive issue across the world, honestly, right now, but especially in the US, is we equate, with food. And that's one of the other questions I get. My snake did not eat this week. It's not hungry. It's telling you it's not hungry. You got to listen to what it's saying, So I think a varied diet, I think a varied time frame, and I think cooler temperatures, and you would see a lot of improvements in the way that your digestion is coming out of the snake itself, and less meal refusals. Because I think the last time I had a meal refusal, I looked at she dropped it after she wrapped it. I found it the next day, and I don't blame her. I think that it was just a bad mouse, So because I had turned around and gave her another one, and she took it down. So. And that would be one other like little side piece I would say, guys, is like if you're getting, especially from like these big breeders of like where they're sending out bulk foods, right? Rodent Pro, Lane Labs, cold-blooded, any of them. If your snake's like dropping it or not wanting to eat it, like don't try and keep waving it in their face. They're probably telling you that that's not a good prey item.
Thanks, Joe. I when it comes to the pushing, I really want to thank Lucas and the Retic Lounge, because when I'm in the gym, that's what I'll listen to on most occasions. Is I'll put an episode of the Retic Lounge on, and I'll work out. And I happen to listen to the episode on pushing in cooler temps, and I have a 32% ish Calatoa Giampea. Then that's what she did. She pushed and pushed and pushed, and her face looked really bad. I felt terrible because I wanted to help her, and I didn't know what to do. And I listened to that episode and I lowered the temps. I come from the world of boa constrictors where everything's 90 to 75. And my retics now are like 82 to 84. to 75. And it seems to work very, very well with all of my Retic. So I want to thank and plug the Retic Lounge for that. And it was some great information. How about you, Chris?
So, I mean, I guess it sounds like I'm about like everybody else. My babies, I do feed fairly consistently. You know, I feed them about every 7 days up until they're about a year old, and then year to 2 years old, every 14 days or ish. But after that, I mean, it's just kind of when I remember or when they look like they want food. And I came from the generation where we just power fed everything. We wanted it to get huge and breed as quick as possible. And I lost a lot of snakes over the years. And I think that was a major factor in it. It's just they were just all obese. And my snakes these days, they're thinner, they're more active. They just seem to be doing a lot better than back when I just, you know, fed everything every week or two. So, you know, my adults, I don't feed really big items, but, you know, a little bit of a lump every 2, 3, 4 weeks, and they seem to be doing good. I haven't had anything push in years, and I think I'm on kind of like the same as everybody else. I've been keeping my room a little bit cooler. I keep it about 74, 75 now, and then the hot spot about 87, 88, and they do great. So it's all on, you know, what I remember and how they're acting is when I'm feeding the adults or sub-adults. But the babies I'm pretty consistent with, just to, you know, get them established and going pretty good.
Thanks, Chris. Lucas, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to show everyone. I don't know if you can see that on camera or not, if it's focusing. No, it's not. But the weekly high in Kalatoa for this upcoming week is 81 degrees. So just, again, just for frame of reference, if you think we're crazy, we're not. Retics prefer cooler temperatures. They're in a subtropical climate. They're not in South America where it's getting, you know, 90, 95 degrees. These, I mean, and this is, you know, one of the warmer times. I've seen it dip down to 63 degrees. So.
Yeah, I've never killed a retic from cool temperatures. I've killed retics when shit gets too hot.
Right.
I've had a heater get stuck on, and, you know, I just fed and I lost 2 big females. So the cooler is safer in my experience.
Thank you. So we're over an hour here. I got a couple more questions I'm going to ask everybody in the live stream. If you guys got a question, let's get it up here for these guys. But my first, I'm going to go ahead and throw this question out for you guys, is that we use this term SuperDwarf and dwarf. And the reality is it's a marketing term as far as my understanding of it is. And I'd like to get everybody's take on, should we be calling it SuperDwarf? Should we be calling it locality? What's your take on it? And Lucas, go ahead. What's your take on it?
It's funny because when you were messaging all of us in the chat, you're like, hey, you know, no controversial topics. And then you asked this question. But no, so me and Joe actually had a really good conversation on Facebook about this the other day. So I'll kind of give my thoughts about it. I don't like the terms. I don't. However, they have their place in the industry. A lot of the way that I come off strongly on social media when I speak against it is a lot of people think that I'm trying to make change, and I'm really not, right? Like I understand where the standards are at. I just kind of give my opinion of where I would like it to be at. If you know the locality information, just say the locality, right? I think where SuperDwarf has a very valuable term to describe it is with the unknown locality stuff from the early 2000s, 90s, you know, when people just didn't care about locality data. Those are SuperDwarfs, right? That's what they've been called forever. We're not going to change that name. But at the end of the day, if you know the localities, state the listed locality. And when anyone asks me, you know, I say obviously with relevance in regards to retics, but, you know, SuperDwarfs, small islands, dwarfs, medium-sized islands, mainlands, large islands, right? So, I guess the reason why I just don't like the term is because on the surface, when you think of dwarf, like if you think of the context of dwarf, let's say you know nothing about retics, right? Let's say you keep other species, and then you hear the word dwarf, right? And you're like, oh, there's dwarf reticulated pythons. Solayers, Jampayas, all recorded 12 to 14, some 16 feet, right? But when we think of the word dwarf, we're talking about dwarfism, something that's small. And then when we think about SuperDwarf, right? Whoa, what SuperDwarf? Like that's even smaller, right? And so I understand, like a lot of people's argument is like, education. We just educate. And I agree wholeheartedly. That's why I do the TRL, education. But we're using terms that are loaded that we then have to educate them with the reality. And that's the reason why I don't like them. It's because we have to work harder to get the misconceptions out of place. So I catch myself using it because it's habit, but I really don't like the terms. But I also don't expect the industry that has been calling it these animals since the 90s to change. No one likes changing. Changing is uncomfortable. And so I wouldn't expect that. So I try to use my small, medium, large. I try to educate people on potential size. And then again, for the old school stuff, SuperDwarf is totally appropriate because that's really the only term. You don't want to call it an unknown locality retic because that's too broad, right? That could be Javan, that could be Malaysian, that could be Borneo, right? So SuperDwarf is definitely the term that we've sunk on, and that's relevant. But yeah, that's my spiel.
Thanks, Lucas. And I agree. And more and more, I'm trying to use the term locality as opposed to SuperDwarf because I think it's got a misconception to it. How about you, Chris?
So I'm kind of on maybe the same page as Lucas a little bit. SuperDwarf, I feel same thing. The old school stuff, there's no other thing to call it because we don't know. Dwarf, I mean, at this point, we could kind of get rid of it. We know the localities. It's true. Like
it is.
Localities should be listed first. If it's unknown, obviously, we got to go with that. But for me, it's kind of like I started out in boa constrictors, and people get butt hurt these days when I call a BCI or BI, whatever they call it now, a red tail. That's what I grew up with. They were red tails, but that's not the true red tail. So for me, SuperDwarf or dwarf is just a descriptive term for a broad variety. It's not actually what the snake is. So the localities I think we should use first, and then if we don't know it, then SuperDwarf. But like I said, dwarf could kind of go away. There are no unknown dwarfs. Jamp, Ternate, Halma, whatever. We know all those.
Thank you, Chris. How about you, Joe?
Yeah, I'm not as big a fan of the marketing terms. I understand them, obviously, working in it and everything. And I think it's a slow boat to turn. Like Lucas said, nobody likes change, but then, Ben's on the comments right here and says change is good when it's needed, right? And it is. I think it's a slow boat to turn, right? And I think that it's people that we all look up to, that we mentioned as our mentors. It's the people on this panel. When you start changing the terminology, it'll start to catch on. And it will become, when you educate people like that, and it's even going to be the ones that are regurging the information are going to start saying the right things. So slow boat to turn, but I think if, everyone that can make that influence start to implement those changes, I think you're going to start seeing it, and it's probably going to happen a little bit quicker than we're going to give it credit for, because there's a lot of mixing and shaking up going on in the community right now, and you're seeing a lot of changes that are kind of happening faster than what I think that you normally otherwise would have. And then I think when you look at also the younger generation, they're implementing change faster than any other generation has in previous history. And I look at it, I have to understand that from a marketing standpoint. Like, how do I talk and understand and reach it? And luckily, they taught me that also in recruiting, because I'm sitting here as a freaking in my mid-30s going into high schools, right? Trying to talk to these kids and sell the Army, sell something that's intangible, right? So I took that same mindset though, and I started applying it, and you realize our generation, right? We have an attention span of about 14 seconds. My kid he's 10. He has an attention span of 6 seconds. If you cannot catch their attention in 6 seconds, then you are doing yourself a disservice on anything that you're doing, because they're not going to listen to your education speech. They're not going to listen to your sales pitch. They're not going to listen to any of it. So, but it's that little thing right there that if the power, not the powers that be, but the people that can make that influence and make that change start saying it, it's going to catch on. And that's where I think that, Chris is absolutely right. There's some of that old stuff, but I think eventually when it goes away, when it dies off, it's going to become a historical piece of data.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe. How about you, Eric?
Yeah, I think for the most part, like everyone has said, it's like more of a marketing thing, but just like everyone says, like if we know the locality, I think most people do it now, because like anytime like anyone posts on any of the groups, like say 75% SD, first thing people ask, what locality? So I think if most people nowadays, like all my posts, I just put all the whatever percentages of that locality, other than I have 3 peers from 2003 imports, like Chris was saying, that's old school, that I just call pure SD. But even like Joe was saying, like you figure next 10, 12, maybe 15 years, when all that early 2000-ish like imports are gone, like from that point on, like if everyone's using locality and percentages from there, I don't think it'll be an issue. Because, most people nowadays, they know, like they kind of, at least I do when I post stuff, I just hedge my bets and make it as crystal clear as possible, even though you're still going to get that one commenter, what locality? And you want to be like, did you read the label? It literally says the locality. But I'm not trying to be an ass, but it's just like, it's literally right there in your face. But I think over time, like whether we want to change or not, that whole SD term will go away by itself, just because as the whole community progresses, breeding progresses, everyone's just going to put those locality percentages, and it will be a non-issue.
As a keeper, and as kind of a newer keeper, I will add, I try not to push against the grain. I hear what people say, and I hear about the marketing terms. So in my own, I just try to change my own language about what I refer to my animals as Kalatoa or Kayuati or Jampea or Soleil, whatever they are. I still do. I catch myself writing SuperDwarf or, but that was one of the big reasons I wanted to have this, was to kind of open this up so that you guys are the old schoolers, man. You guys are the ones who are teaching the new school people, about this and showing them how to carry this on. And this is going to bring me to the last question. And the last question is that just recently I saw that Dan Solis is no longer breeding or selling animals. He's completely getting out of it. And when I see something like that, I have a Dan Solis animal in my collection. I also have an Eric Lee animal in my collection, a Lucas Bagnera animal in my collection, and multiple Chris McVicker animals in my collection. But you guys are kind of
slacking, Joe.
You missed this discussion earlier. Why he doesn't have it? It's completely my fault.
I won't say that. But at any rate, the question is, what do you guys have to say to the newer people that are now catching on to the locality / SuperDwarf / breeding train? That they're everybody. I see a lot of people posting about it. They're looking to the future. They want to be the next locality breeders. What do you guys have to say to the next generation? So, Eric, you first.
I think a lot of the things that the newer keepers are doing are amazing. Like those really like more, just kind of not necessarily bioactive, but the much larger enclosures, full spectrum lighting, UVB, stuff that like a lot of the old school keepers haven't used. But I mean, I know they're implementing it. Like I do the jungle gym. I've seen other breeders either have a jungle gym in their reptile room when they take them out to clean stuff, so they're climbing, or just like a separate room altogether. I think the big thing is kind of like the takeaway that a lot of people have said on the panel, where we're just kind of the stepping stone for the next evolution of keeping, which lately it's more of that, hey, we need more stuff for them, because that whole, cage, paper, a dog bowl, like that's not enough anymore. Like that old standby is dead and gone, or at least in the process of it, which I think is great. I think a lot of it now will be more just, a lot of people are like start target training stuff that I know I've never considered ever. And I looked into it, right? I'm like, oh, that's cool. don't physically have enough hours in a day to implement things that when, like I said, keepers have the luxury of time and space because a couple animals, you can do amazing things and you can experiment. When I spent 40, 50 hours just cleaning, then trying to stay up with everything else, like I don't have that luxury. Which another thing is, I think a lot of the newer breeders realize they're not looking for massive collections. Like old school guys, like when I got into it, like way back in the day, or even when I was in Arizona, the entire room filled with retics, where I think a lot of people now like, hey, I want a core group of, I don't know, like say 7, 8, 10 animals. Then from there, everything's streamlined and it's very purpose driven where they're not like, I'm sure Chris knows like back then, I have one empty slot, another rack goes here, another cage goes there. I literally have to get on a 8-foot ladder to get my top cage right now in my room. But it's like one of those things where no one wants to do that. That's a pain in the butt. I think just the whole thought process of very selective breedings and just giving more for your animals, exercise, stimulation, in their cage, out of their cage, more handling sessions with them on a regular basis. I think that's a huge push for all the new breeders. And like I've told people, I think the newer breeders, what's going to set them apart is not the projects, because at the end of the day, we're all going to have the same projects everyone else has because no new imports. So to whatever extent, we're all going to have everyone's projects eventually. What's going to set the new breeders apart is how they maintain their collections, whether caging, husbandry, stuff like that. That's what's going to set all these future breeders apart from everyone else. It's not the projects, it's how they maintain their animals.
Awesome. Thank you. How about you, Chris?
Well, I've learned a lot from the new keepers lately. The past 2 years, I'm revamping my entire collection because I want to do better. I've seen so many good things come from the newer guys that have taught me a lot. And I want bigger caging, less animals so that I can interact with them more, give them more space, give them more stuff to interact with in the cage, outside the cage. So the newer keepers are already teaching us old people what to do, the correct way or a better way. How about that? And I think the newer keepers, if they want to set themselves apart, it's kind of like Eric said, it's husbandry, caging, how you interact with your animals, but focus on something you really like, you really enjoy, and try to produce the best. Shane did it years ago, and he was a pioneer in it with the Sunfire stuff and the Orange Ghost stuff. Set yourself apart that way. Do it right and focus on just a small project. Don't get 100 retics and just try to mass produce some shit. It's just not going to work out. These days, you got to do it right. And that's the only thing that's going to keep you in it.
Thank you. Lucas, why don't you give us your answer?
Yeah. So, me and Eric have had a phone call like a handful of times talking about just the future of successful reptile breeders are those that are niche, smaller. My damn cat keeps unplugging the light. Smaller, niched, and that have phenomenal enclosures and naturalistic setups. And that couldn't be more true because more and more of the new people that are coming in are not wanting to buy from the mass producers, right? I think we've done a good job as breeders in the community and as those who have been a part of the community to like use that term retic mill, right? And I think that's like finally caught wind. And people don't want to buy animals from, those type of people for much longer. So if you are going to want to breed retics, I would give you a few bullet points. So number one, find your niche. And what I mean by niche is find your area that you love, have a passion for, and can perfect it. And what I mean by perfect it is let me use the example tiger. If you like tiger, make the best damn tiger that anybody has ever seen, right? And number two is as far as having a passion for it, this kind of ties into number two, but I want to give major props to Garrett. One thing that Garrett has done is his ability on camera to speak passionately about these animals is that shit's I'm gonna say it. That shit's contagious. I said it 5 times. it's contagious. And so if you are working with something that you like, right? You have a passion and you're able to share that passion, people are going to feel passionate about that and want to buy it. And so my next thing is use localities to enhance phenotypic expressions or polygenic expressions of animals. A lot of animals, like I agree with Eric, at some point in the future, there's going to be a time where there's so many people breeding that whatever is being looked for is going to be out there. But at least right now in the game, it is still a very, very new thing that people are using locality to enhance a single gene or a 2-gene animal. And so the locality aspect of keeping reticulated pythons, I can't emphasize the importance of that. Because if you buy a morph and you buy another morph and you take those morphs together, or you take a morph, or you buy a collection, or your collection consists of only 1 or 2 people and you're taking them together, the chances of you enhancing any of those animals without introducing something different or new, you're not going to be able to make a better looking animal. And if we all don't do that, we're all going to be producing the same looking animals. So locality is super important, and grow slowly. I made the mistake and I grew quickly. And I say a mistake in the sense of like, my animals are happy, healthy. I have good size caging for them. Of course, I want to go bigger and better. But just enjoy the process before it becomes overwhelming, right? Like just really sit down and enjoy each animal, and don't be in a rush to breed, because I'm going to be honest with you guys. At the end of the day, I don't know anybody whose sole income is just breeding snakes. You have to either produce cages, you have to be a YouTuber, you have to have a mass following on Patreon. Like just breeding snakes is not like, it's not going to happen. And so just enjoy the process, really enjoy the process, love the animals. And because when you feel like you've bought 15, 20 hatchlings that are manageable, by year 2, year 3, when they start pissing and pooping and it's a lot more, that easy spot cleaning and cage cleaning and stuff with those babies, oof, you're in for a rude awakening when those snakes start to grow. So just enjoy it. And lastly, I just want to give a huge shout out to, we talk about the young generation or new generation. Not a lot of them are young, but this new generation of people coming in have really impacted the Retic community more than any other. I think everyone has already commented on it, but you guys have really pushed us that actually care about the animals to be better and to do better. And so just keep pushing that agenda. Keep wanting your breeders to do better for the animals, because that's how the Retic industry is going to look better from the outside in, because right now we don't look good, and we haven't looked good for a very long time. And we're slowly doing that. So for those of you that are just now getting into Retics, pushing us to do better, thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Lucas. Joe, you want to take us out?
Listen, man, it's hard to follow that, right? Like, what else can you say? Everybody said everything. Okay. The one thing I would say is really, like, if you think you want to be a breeder, assess the question and talk with your mentor as to why do you want to be a breeder? Is it just because you have it? Like, listen, just because you have a snake does not mean you had to breed it. I field this question all the time. Well, I got it and I got to breed it. Let me tell you that 90% of the people do not make it to their first clutch. They will literally raise those animals just like Lucas was talking about. They get so many because it's easy to take care of 20 hatchlings, and I am a product of that.
Same.
I am a product. I spent, let me put it in perspective. I started with that. I told you about that little bitty SuperDwarf beside Chapstick tube, right? That was the start of it. It was like $1,200 or something, $800. I don't know. It wasn't a ton. And then within 2.5 years, and there's already a video out there, but I dropped almost $100,000 investing in Retics. right? It's awesome. I love it. I have them, but it is literally a second job for me. Like I have to come home and I have very set days where I'm like, nope, it's cleaning day. Nope, this is going on. And if I have some other thing that I let take that, then I have to then compromise somewhere else in my week. So really sit down. If you are a new person that thinks you want to breed, sit down and talk with people who are like on this panel that are experienced breeders, that are experienced with large collections, and really listen to them and don't think that they don't not. I know. I've got 5 babies. I know how easy this is. It's not, because the difference between cleaning 5 babies and 5 adults. 5 babies, I reach in the tub. I don't care if you bite me, bam, boom, in the tub. Like if you're being a pain in the butt, like
Right.
bigger than you, crane operation, right? And just like because I don't care if I get bit. That 11-footer that I talked about earlier, if she gets a hold of me, like, I mean, I've posted the picture, like I think on, definitely the US SuperDwarf, and I think the Retic Alliance, where she was wrapped the hook. It never fails. She will literally, and she's 11 feet of just nonstop. So it's her alone is like, it can be up to a 15-minute endeavor to get her into a thing so I can clean her cage. And I mean, it's always, even if your big ones are nice, they're not wanting to go from their cage into a tub. They're out, they're moving. It's always a struggle. So I would say definitely like approach it with not the know-it-all attitude, right? Just because you have a couple babies, you see it's easy. It's not going to stay that way. All right. Second, the biggest thing I would say is if you and your breeder can really come to an agreement that like, yeah, maybe you know what, breeding would be good for you. It's been said, find your niche, right? But really pick a focus, because if you try and have your hands in every project, it's not going to work out great. It's just not, because you're going to be like, you're going to start to resent, like, man, all right, I got this female. It's going to be awesome for this, but she's a double het. So now, like, I've got to spend this money over here. No, I know it coming up to pull the genes out the best way possible, right? So if you're trying to do like all these different recessives that just don't work with each other and there's nothing out there, like if you want to be the first and that's your goal, cool. Mix all those recessives, make it happen, and have a project. You got an idea in your head, chase it. I'm all about it. But understand the work that's going to come behind it. And the other side of it is, I would tell you, if you decide that you really do want to be a breeder, start with females, because you're going to be disappointed that when you're like, and this is one I feel all the time too. And this is where I'm like, call me, we got to have a conversation. I got to explain to you why you don't need the male that you think you do. Like, because literally the male that may be the best for you this year, say it is $5,000, right? And it's going to pull everything out. That same male in 2 years, when you're female, when you need to be growing that male to like hit that same point that your females are ready to breed, is either going to be $3,500 and obsolete because there's something better and new, right? Or you're going to see it and you're going to go spend the money anyway, and you're never going to use that male. I've got males that were like that, and because I didn't listen, Garrett told me, buy females. Nope, I gotta have the male. I'm a School of Hard Knocks learner, and it cost me a lot of money that I try to very much educate people, like, hey, like if that is your goal, do it this way, because it's proven, tried and true. I'm not steering you wrong, and have some patience. And patience is the other key, because a lot of people, they get out there, they get their snake their first year, and they're starting to grow, and they're like, man, I just cannot wait to breed. Who's got a breeder female for me? Let me tell you, I bought breeder females. This is also not a hard knocks lesson. Bought breeder females. I waited just as long for that breeder female that already had a clutch as I did growing up the flipping baby, and they had the same freaking 4 years of gap. She just refused to breed because, if you buy a breeder female, it's not guaranteed she's going to breed for you that year. She's making a big move. She's making a climate change. So you have this expectation, and your mentor should be helping you to understand that expectation is possibly not going to happen. And then when it doesn't happen, don't get mad at your mentor. because you had unrealistic expectations. That's the best thing I can tell new keepers. Don't get mad at your mentor because your unrealistic expectations didn't happen. We tried to tell you, like, I promise you, I would never buy an adult female ever again. The oldest female that I would ever take an opportunity on would be 2 years old. That's the timeline. Other than that, I'll raise them all myself. And honestly, at this point, I prefer to do that 100% as raise them from a baby, because I see the difference in how my babies, to adults are raised versus like some of the other ones that I've got. Like, I didn't raise Boca.
They teach you to dance.
Oh yeah,
They teach you to dance.
I'm telling you. So don't be in a rush. That's me reiterating. Everybody's points. Find your niche. Figure out like what is it that's doable where it's still enjoyable, because like if you are going at it with an expectation, I'm gonna make money hand over fist, guess what, guys? Like if your females don't go, like if you've got 10 females and 5 of them go, that's a successful year. Any of these guys will tell you that, right? Like I had 21 pairings planned for this year and I got 11. That's a success to me. At 11 pairings, 11 clutches, I think it's awesome, And everybody's like, nope, I'm going to have 20 and I'm going to do this. Guys, you are setting yourself up for your own disappointment. And so avoid that and, find a mentor, talk to them, go through their early days. I'm still in my early days very much. So and there's, Garrett's got the videos up there where you can go back and see I'm not lying because I said it back then. So that'd be my biggest advice. Find what you like, chase that, and don't get distracted because, all those stuff is a lot prettier in other people's collections.
Yeah. Gary, do you mind if I add one thing, just the counselor skills in my head listening to everybody? There was something that I think everybody was saying, but like it wasn't said in like a very
clear.
No, not clear. Like everybody made their points very clear, but there's like a theme that I see. If you like the way that your life is right now, ask yourself, if you want to be a retic breeder, what are you going to be willing to sacrifice to get out? Because that's what ends up happening. Everybody just talked about the work, the disappointments, the time, the commitment. And so ask yourself that if you really love your life right now and your Saturday morning coffees and all the nice dinners that you do, and you got to sacrifice something if you're going to be a retic breeder. So that's the only thing I want to add. I think everybody kind of said that without saying it, and I kind of it all connected.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I tell you what, you get up at 4:00 in the morning and I do spot checks on all my animals, and I'll tell you what, the last thing in the world I want to do is clean pee and poo at 4:00 in the morning. I'm thinking I'm going to get in, check, and get out. And then I see it and I go, I can't leave her like that all day long. So it does. It's a definite schedule disruption, but it's worth it. It's very rewarding.
Definitely worth it.
Yeah.
I want to thank you guys so very much for taking an hour and 45 minutes out of your day for this. I appreciate it. I'm going to do real quick. Lucas, if somebody wants to find you on social media, where do they find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Facebook, just type in Lab Exotics, or on Instagram at lab_exotics_. Also, if you want to listen to the YouTube channel with my co-host Nathan Katz, The Retic Lounge, we're on Instagram and on YouTube.
Awesome. Thank you. How about you, Eric?
You can find me on Instagram as SD_snow_king. So SD Snow King.
Thank you. Joe.
Yeah, so either Facebook is just Joe Hull, or Instagram is GI_Joes_SDs, SDS. So GI Joes SDs. You can find me on Instagram, but that's the only 2 spots. I'm not up on. I don't have a podcast or nothing.
Info at Reach Out Reptiles.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, this is about me, man. Like, I just work there. Right. It's no shameless plug for the business tonight.
How about you, Chris?
So I'm on Facebook and Instagram. I think my Facebook is either Chris or Christopher McVicker, and then my Instagram is Chris McVicker2. Both of them got deleted, so I don't remember which ones they are. But those are the only two I got.
If anybody needs help finding Chris, just contact me. I'll get you in touch.
If you search Chris McVicker, you'll see my bald head.
I want to thank you guys again for the time shared. I want to thank everybody who joined in on the live stream. Again, if you guys see the video, please like it. That's all I really care about. The algorithms go up, people get to see it, and that's what we need. We need the information out there so that people get a little more understanding of SuperDwarf and dwarf retics, locality retics. And man, this every time I do one of these, I think to myself, this was amazing. This one set the bar like super high. So I want to thank you guys again for taking the time, and we're going to end this. So like I said, no bells and whistles, guys. We're just going to go. So thank you guys again. I appreciate it.
Anytime. Thanks,
for having me,
guys.
man.
Thanks,
Thanks for having us on.